Welcome to the very first episode of Let's Make Sense of It. If you're new here, I'm Tina, and this is the place where we take confusing behavior, we slow it down enough to explore different possibilities for what might actually be happening instead of just assuming the worst about ourselves. I don't claim to have all the answers. What I have is what I have learned on my own healing journey, and that's what I'm sharing here in hopes that it may work for you too, or just help you make a little bit more sense of the things that you're experiencing. And for our very first episode, our very first conversation, I wanted to start with something that came up more than once when I asked you to send in a situation or a story that you've been struggling with to make sense of. And it was some variations of this very thing. I try to tell my partner exactly how I feel and they get defensive. Then somehow the conversation turns into an argument and I walk away wondering if I should have said anything at all. And here's the one part that really stood out to me. It wasn't only that your partner got defensive, it was what happened to you afterwards. You started questioning yourself. Was it the way that I said it? Did I bring it up at the wrong time? Am I expecting too much? Am I being too sensitive? Should I just have let it go and not said anything at all? And if you've been having the same conversation over and over again, I can totally understand why you'd eventually start wondering if maybe you're the problem. So that's what I want to make sense of here today. But before we begin, there's something I want to be clear about. I'm not here to diagnose or pretend I can tell you exactly why they reacted the way that they did. What we can do is slow the interaction down, look at it from different angles, and see if there's something that maybe you just haven't considered before. So, in saying that, let's start at the very beginning. Something happened that hurt you, bothered you, or left you feeling disconnected from your partner. And you decided to bring it up. You may have said something as simple as, "Hey, I've been feeling like we haven't spent any time together, and I really miss hanging out with you." And in your mind, you're just sharing how you feel, right? What's the harm in that? But imagine for a second that your partner hears this. "You're not giving me enough attention," or "I'm totally failing as your partner." And those are two completely different messages. They might be hearing criticism when all you're doing is you're just trying to connect. There could be all kinds of reasons for that. Criticism might be particularly difficult for them. They might genuinely feel like they're trying. So what you're saying to them, it feels unfair. Or there could be something that's going on or happening for them that we couldn't possibly know. We could literally spend the entire episode guessing which experience is right. So let's stay with what actually happened instead. Let's say that they responded to you expressing your feelings by saying, "Are you serious? We're literally together all the time." Now you feel confused because you weren't accusing them of anything. You were just trying to say, "Hey, you know what? I miss you." So you start to explain, "No, that's not what I meant. I know we're together. I just mean that we haven't really connected." And then they say something like, "Nothing I ever do is good enough for you." Now look at where this conversation has gone. You started with, "I miss you," and suddenly you're defending whether you appreciate them enough. So you try again. You slow things down. "That's not what I'm saying." You explain it differently, you soften your words, you reassure them, And somewhere along the way, the original thing you were trying to talk about just disappears. And this is where I think the whole thing can start to make a little more sense. Because somewhere along the way, your conversation changed. You were talking about how you felt, and they were responding with what they thought your feelings meant about them. And then you started responding to their interpretation instead of the thing you originally wanted to talk about. So now there's actually two conversations going at the same time. There's the one that you started with, I've been feeling disconnected from you, and there's the one that you're having now, do I appreciate you enough? But only one of those was the conversation you came to them to have. Because you go in knowing what you want to say, and then 20 minutes later, you're explaining yourself, reassuring them, and defending what you actually meant, or even apologizing for sharing your feelings to begin with. But what if you didn't necessarily say the wrong thing? What if the conversation simply stopped being about the thing you were trying to talk about? And I know it sounds simple because once you recognize that shift, you have something much more useful to work with. You can stop and say, I hear that what I said felt critical to you, and I want to understand that. I really do. But I also don't want us to lose what I was originally talking about from the beginning. So can we just come back to that? Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't guarantee that this conversation will suddenly go differently and everything will be fine. Your partner might still even get defensive when you say that, and you might still disagree, but you're no longer getting pulled away from what you originally wanted to talk about. And of course, there's another side worth considering. Maybe they just misunderstood you and they don't really know what you need from them. Maybe they thought that you wanted them to fix something, but all you really wanted was them to listen. Or maybe the timing that it was brought up just wasn't the best time. Or something in the way that you brought it up could have maybe landed differently for them. That's possible too. Let me be clear. Making sense of something isn't deciding who's right. It's about being curious enough to consider that you might not be seeing everything, including asking, could I have misunderstood something too? And here's something I want you to hold on to. And it's not just for this episode, it's for every other conversation we have here. It's this. You can understand that your partner felt criticized and still recognize that your feelings deserve space in that conversation too. Understanding gives you context. It doesn't require you to excuse the behavior. And this is where I would start to pay attention to what happens next. Can you come back to the conversation later? Can you say, I don't think that conversation went the way either of us wanted. Can we just try again? Can your partner get curious about your experiences? Can you get curious about your partner's? Because one defensive reaction doesn't necessarily tell you very much about the relationship. But you know what does? A pattern. Because if every time you express your hurt, the conversation turns into what you've done wrong, and you find yourself apologizing for bringing it up altogether, or you rehearsed your words beforehand because you're worried they'll be twisted and taken the wrong way, or you just stay quiet because speaking feels harder than carrying the feeling yourself. Then the question may no longer be, why does my partner get defensive? It might be more, what is this pattern trying to tell me? That doesn't mean that there's nothing for you to work on, because there might be. You might need to communicate differently sometimes, and they might too. Relationships are rarely as simple as one person being completely right and the other being completely wrong. But having healthy communication can't depend on you finding the perfect communication of words that prevent the other person from ever feeling uncomfortable. Because difficult conversations are sometimes uncomfortable. But what matters the most is what you two are able to do with the discomfort that you're feeling. So the next time you walk away from one of those conversations thinking, maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I shouldn't have even brought it up. Maybe I am the problem. But before you start blaming yourself, before you go there, ask yourself these 3 questions. 1. What was I originally trying to communicate? 2. Are we still talking about that? And 3. And if we're not, when did the conversation change? Then zoom out a little further. Is this one difficult conversation that the 2 of you can eventually come back to? Or does this just keep happening? Because those 2 are 2 completely different things. And you don't need to solve exactly why they got defensive in the first place. Maybe the clarity that you've been looking for starts someplace simpler, with noticing what's actually happening in this conversation, where it started, where it went, and whether the thing that you were trying to say ever had a chance to be heard. Sometimes clarity doesn't come from finally figuring someone out. Sometimes it comes from understanding your own experiences. And maybe today, that's enough. So I hope this made a little more sense. And if there is a situation in your own life that you just can't quite make sense of, you can send me an anonymous email at talk@evolvingwithtina.com, or there is a link in my description where you can share your story with me. And don't worry, you can be completely anonymous. And maybe we can make a little more sense of it together. If this episode made a little more sense of something that you've been sitting with, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if there's someone that you know who needs to hear this, someone who's been stuck replaying conversations, wondering if they're the problem, send them this video. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do for someone is to let them know they're not the only one trying to make sense of it. So, until next time, my fellow evolvers, keep evolving, keep glowing, and never stop showing up for yourself because you matter. Much love.